Darius Cole was 40 years old and had not slept in 3 days. That was the first thing most people would have noticed about him, if they had looked. The slight hollowness around the eyes, the careful way he moved, the way a man moves when he's conserving something. He was sitting on the low wall outside the Fairmont Street family shelter at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. He was wearing a pair of gray work pants and a jacket that had been washed too many times and had begun to say so. He had been at the shelter for 9 days. Before that, 22 days in his car. Before that, a sequence of events that had dismantled his life so completely and so fast that he still sometimes reached for the version of things that used to be true before he remembered it wasn't anymore. He did not think about that now. He thought about the coffee. He thought about the job board posted inside the shelter's front hallway, which he had checked 3 times already that morning. The woman came at 7:15. She walked up the sidewalk quickly, the way busy people walk, with a phone in one hand and a coffee of her own in the other. She stopped in front of him. She looked at the shelter entrance, then at Darius, then at the shelter entrance again. She said, "This is going to sound strange. I have a child care emergency. Our nanny's out. I have a board meeting at 9, and I cannot find anyone. I'm a block away. I'd pay $400 for the day." Darius set down the cold coffee. He said, "How old is the child?" She said, 7. "She's good. She won't be any trouble." He looked at this woman, the tailored coat, the ID badge clipped to her lapel, the address of the building she'd pointed to visible just up the block. He thought about what $400 meant for where he was right now. He thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. He said, "All right." She had no idea who she was asking. By the end of that day, she would. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And hit subscribe, because the story coming tomorrow is one you absolutely cannot miss. The building was cold and bright in the way of expensive lobbies. Darius followed the woman. Her name was Camille Aldred. She told him in the elevator, regional director of operations for a healthcare company, up to the 14th floor, into an apartment that had the particular stillness of a home where everything was placed rather than left. There were framed prints on the walls. There was a kitchen that looked like it was used to cook real food. There was a girl sitting at the dining table eating cereal, 7 years old, with braids and a serious expression. The girl looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "You're not Rosa." He said, "No, I'm Darius." She said, "Where's Rosa?" He said, "Rosa's not feeling well today." She considered this. She picked up her spoon. She said, "Do you know how to play chess?" He said he did. She said, "Good, Rosa doesn't. It's annoying." Camille Aldred had given him her number, the building's front desk number, the name and number of the girl's pediatrician, and a typed sheet of instructions that covered lunch, nap schedule, screen time limits, and what to do if Mia, that was the girl's name, Mia, got what she called the crying kind of bored, which was apparently distinct from regular bored in ways that had been documented enough to make the instruction sheet. She had looked at him once more before she left, with the particular expression of someone who had made a decision faster than their instincts could fully evaluate. And then she had gone. Darius stood in the kitchen for a moment. He looked at the instruction sheet. He looked at Mia, who had finished her cereal and was now watching him with the assessing focus of a 7-year-old who had decided he was being evaluated, and not the other way around. He said, "You want to set up the board?" She was already out of her chair. What Darius Cole had been, before the 9 days at the shelter and the 22 days in his car and the sequence of events before that, was this: the founder and chief executive of Meridian Capital Group, a private equity firm managing $3 billion in healthcare and infrastructure assets, with offices in 3 cities and a staff of 61 people. He had started it at 32. 8 years. From a Series B round he'd spent 14 months assembling, through a first acquisition that nearly ended him, through the kind of compounding success that happened slowly and then very fast. He had been on the cover of a trade publication once. He hadn't loved that, but he understood the value of it. He had given his word to exactly the number of people he intended to give it to, and had not broken it once. He had been, until 4.5 months ago, a man with an office on the 23rd floor of a building that bore his firm's name on the directory downstairs. Then his co-founder, a man named Patrick Sears, had executed a shareholder coup. A slow, methodically built majority position assembled over 11 months, while Darius had been managing the firm's largest acquisition. Patrick had used the regulatory filing window, a supermajority clause buried in the original partnership agreement, and the board relationships Darius had never bothered to cultivate, because he had trusted Patrick to manage them. On a Thursday morning in September, Darius had been voted out of his own company. It was done in a meeting that took 41 minutes. Patrick had said after that he hoped Darius understood this wasn't personal. He had said the word strategy 4 times in the following 2 sentences. He had not looked Darius in the eye when he said it. What followed was a legal fight that had cost Darius, in 4 months, everything that wasn't in the asset structures his attorney had the foresight to ring-fence before the legal fees began to accumulate. The apartment, gone, locked in an escrow dispute. The accounts, frozen by court order while the shareholder challenge was litigated. The car, after the 2nd month. He had not told his mother. He had not told anyone except his attorney, a woman named Sylvia Chen, who had called him every morning at 8 o'clock for 4 months and said, each time, "Don't do anything yet." He had not done anything yet. What he had done, in the meantime, was learn how to live inside the perimeter of what remained, which was not much. A prepaid phone, the clothes in a bag, a folder in his jacket inside pocket that contained 4 documents, copies. Sylvia had the originals that he did not look at often, but knew exactly. He was 40 years old, and he had built something real, and had it taken from him. He was not broken about it. He was precise about it. There was a difference. Mia beat him at chess in the first game, because he had let her. He had started holding back halfway through the second when he realized she was good enough to notice, and she had noticed anyway. She said, "You did that on purpose." He said, "The first game, yes. The second, no." She looked at the board. She said, "I like the second one better." He said, "Me too." Camille Aldred came home at 6:43 that evening. She came in a little faster than she had left, which told him the meeting had gone the way meetings go when they take more than they were supposed to. She stopped when she saw the kitchen. The table had been set. Mia was at it, finishing a bowl of pasta with the particular focus of a child who has decided she likes something. On the counter, a second portion was covered with a plate. Camille looked at the table. She looked at Mia. She said, "Did you cook?" Mia said, mouth full, "Darius cooked. He said you probably didn't eat." Camille looked at him. He said, "There was pasta and tomatoes." It seemed straightforward. She stood in the hallway with her coat still on and looked at the table and the covered plate and the girl eating with her hair still in the braids from this morning, and something moved across her face that he recognized as the expression of a person recalibrating. She said, "How much do I owe you?" He said, 400, you said." She got out her wallet. She counted it. She held it out. He took it. He folded it. He put it in his jacket pocket, next to the folder. She said, Would you consider coming back tomorrow? Rosa's out until Thursday at the earliest. He thought about the job board in the shelter hallway. He thought about the cold coffee on the low wall at 6:47 in the morning. He said, what time? She said 7:30. He said, all right. He came back Wednesday. He came back Thursday, when Rosa called out again. By Friday, Camille had stopped asking with the qualifying language, if you're available, I know it's short notice, and had simply texted him a time. And he had texted back okay, and that had been the shape of it. On Friday evening, Mia was doing homework at the table when she said, without looking up, my mom has a camera. Darius was washing the lunch dishes. He said, most people do, she said in the bookcase. She told me when I asked. She said, it's for safety. He said, that seems reasonable. She said, it's been there since I was little, before Rosa. She turned a page in her workbook. She told me if anyone ever did something not right, the camera would see it. He set the last dish in the rack. He said, your mom sounds careful. Mia said, she is. She looked up. You are too. He didn't say anything. She looked back at her workbook. She said, I can tell the difference. Sylvia Chen called him Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, as she always did. She said, I need you to sit down. He was already sitting. He was on the cot in the shelter room, which he had to himself on weekends because his roommate went to his sister's. He said, tell me, she said. We got the forensic accounting back. All of it. There was a pause. He waited. She said, Patrick didn't just remove you from the board. He's been moving money since March. There are 3 vendor contracts that were restructured in the 6 months before the vote. 2 of them routing a combined $840,000 in management fees to an LLC registered in Delaware that traces back to a holding company he set up in January. The forensic accountant found the connection at the 3rd level. It took her 6 weeks. Darius sat with that for a moment. He said, who's the accountant? Sylvia said, her name is Renata Kim. She's been doing this for 22 years. She said, and I'm quoting her, I've seen people hide money. This wasn't hiding. This was someone who thought no one would ever look. He said, what else? She said, there's more. A pause. The filing with the regulatory body in September, the one that established the supermajority position. There was a disclosure form that should have named you as an affected party. It didn't. That's not a technicality. That's a violation. We've already filed a complaint. Darius stood up. He walked to the window. The street below was gray and quiet for a Saturday. He said, when? She said, I've scheduled a meeting for Thursday. Their attorneys, ours, and a mediator. Though I want you to understand, we are not mediating anything. We are presenting. I want them to understand, in that room, exactly what we have and exactly what we intend to do with it if this doesn't resolve in your favor. He said, the board, she said, 3 of the 4 remaining board members have already been contacted by my office. 2 have requested private conversations. They are not as loyal to Patrick as he assumed. He looked at the street. He said, Sylvia. She said, yes, he said, 8 o'clock every morning for 4 months. She said, you would have done the same. He said, I know. She said, Thursday, 9 o'clock. Don't do anything before then. He said he wouldn't. He didn't move fast. That was the part Patrick had never been able to model for. He had assumed that a man who had been removed from everything he built would act from that loss, would make mistakes in the velocity of grief or anger, would overreach, would give them something they could use. He had been wrong about the most important thing. He had confused Darius's patience for the absence of capacity. It wasn't. Patience was simply how Darius operated. It was the discipline behind everything he had ever built. You do not close a $2-3 billion portfolio by being fast. You close it by being right. Patrick called him on Monday. Darius let it go to voicemail. He called again Tuesday morning. The second message said he hoped they could discuss this like professionals, and mentioned the word resolution twice, and said he would be open to a conversation at Darius's convenience. The tone was careful in a way that meant someone had told him to be careful. Darius listened to it once and put the phone in his pocket. Camille Aldred texted him Monday evening. She said Rosa was back and she wouldn't need him in the mornings anymore. She said she wanted to pay him for the full week even though he'd only worked 4 days. He wrote back that 4 days was 4 days and she should pay 4. She wrote back. After a moment, Mia asked when you're coming back. He sat with that for a moment. He wrote, "Tell her I said to keep practicing the Sicilian defense. She'll figure out why." Darius Cole arrived at the offices of Merrick and Lowe on Thursday morning at 8:43. The meeting was at 9. He liked being early. He always had. The conference room was on the 17th floor. Glass walls, long table. The city outside flat and gray under November clouds. A pitcher of water and 6 glasses arranged at the center of the table with a particular neatness that meant someone had arranged them this morning and felt the tidiness mattered. Sylvia was already there. She was 61 years old, small and straight-backed, with close-cut silver hair and the focused stillness of a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms exactly like this one and had learned to treat the waiting as part of the work. She was looking at her documents. She did not look up when Darius sat down. She said, "How are you?" He said, "Ready." She said, "Good." She turned a page. "Renata is on standby by phone. If they dispute the forensic numbers, I'll put her on speaker. But I don't think they'll dispute them." He said, "Why not?" She said, "Because their own forensic accountants saw the same numbers 3 weeks ago when they ran their internal audit. They know what we have." She looked up at him then. She said, "They are not coming in here to fight Darius. They are coming in here to find out what it costs." At 9:04, Patrick Sears came through the door. He was 44 years old, and he was dressed in the way of a man who uses clothing to locate himself. Charcoal suit, no tie. The kind of watch that costs more than some people's cars. He had 2 attorneys behind him. He looked at Darius once. A quick, assessing look. Then he looked at Sylvia. Then he sat down. His lead attorney said, "Thank you for making time." "We'd like to," Sylvia said. "I'll start." She opened the first folder. What followed was 47 minutes of documentation. The vendor contracts, the LLC structure, the Delaware registration. The holding company established in January, 4 months before the vote. The management fees, $840,000, moved in 2 tranches across Q1 and Q2. The forensic trail Renata Kim had built across 6 weeks of work, connection by connection, until the full shape of it was visible. Then the regulatory filing, the disclosure form, the named violation, the complaint already lodged. Then the board contacts, the 2 private conversations. The board members who had already indicated they were reconsidering the September vote in light of the disclosure issue. Sylvia laid each document flat on the table. Not dramatically. The way someone lays out what's real. Patrick's attorneys conferred twice in quiet voices. Patrick himself said nothing. He sat with the particular stillness of a man who is working very hard not to let a room see what is happening inside him. Darius had seen that stillness before, in other rooms, on other faces. He recognized it as the stillness of a man who had believed the room was already his and was discovering it was not. At the 47th minute, Patrick's lead attorney said they would need time to review. Sylvia said, "Of course." She said they had until the following Friday. She said that if they did not receive a response by then, she intended to file the complete forensic package with the relevant regulatory authority, share the board documentation with the 2 board members who had reached out, and proceed with the civil fraud claim. She said all of this in the same tone she used for everything: level, factual, not cold, simply precise. Patrick looked at Darius then. For the first time in the meeting, his expression was calibrated and controlled, and Darius could see the calibration, which meant it wasn't working. Darius said, quietly, "You told me it wasn't personal." Patrick said nothing. Darius said, "I know." He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Sylvia's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. He said to Patrick the one thing he had been holding since September. He said it without raising his voice, because it wasn't for the room. "You built something real with me, Patrick, and then you decided it was yours. You were wrong about which one of us it was built around. And now, the building is going to tell you so." He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The response came on the following Thursday, one day before Sylvia's deadline. The terms they offered were substantive: full reinstatement to the board, restoration of the CEO position, a structured settlement on the misappropriated funds, $840,000, repaid over 18 months from Patrick's personal stake, and an agreed regulatory disclosure resolving the filing violation. Patrick Sears resigned from Meridian Capital Group on a Wednesday in December. His resignation letter was 4 sentences. Darius read it once. The asset freeze was lifted on the 22nd of November. Darius was back in his office on the 23rd floor on the first Monday of December. He had been out of it for 4 months and 6 days. He answered every email himself that first week, every call. His assistant, a young man named Theo who had stayed on through the transition and had sent Darius one text message during the whole of it, which said only "still here," had kept the operational files in order. Darius thanked him on Monday morning and gave him a raise that afternoon. The work was the same. The building was the same. His name was still on the directory downstairs. By February, the firm had closed 2 pending deals that had stalled in the uncertainty of the previous autumn. By March, the 3rd city office had expanded by 4 staff. By April, there was a $400 million infrastructure fund in final close that Darius had been building toward for 2 years before the vote. He thought sometimes, in those months, about 9 days in a shelter and 22 days in a car. He thought about it the way you think about something that tested a thing in you and found it still there, not with nostalgia, not with bitterness, with a kind of quiet respect for what it had asked of him. He kept the 4 documents, not the originals. Sylvia had those. But the copies, in the same jacket inside pocket. He couldn't have said exactly why. Some things you carry until you understand why you're carrying them, and some things you just carry. He texted Camille Aldred in February. He said he had a situation resolved and had been meaning to follow up. He said he was sorry for the delay. She wrote back after a few hours. She said, "Mia taught her father the Sicilian defense last weekend. He has no idea what happened to him." He read that once, and then read it again. He wrote back, "She's going to be fine." On a Thursday evening in April, Darius Cole walked the 23rd floor after everyone had gone home. He did this sometimes. He liked the building at this hour, the way the ambient light came off the city through the windows, the faint smell of coffee still in the air from the afternoon. The quiet that was different from absence. It was the quiet of a place that worked. He stood at the window for a moment. The city was lit and moving below him, indifferent and familiar. He was 40 years old. He had built something real. Someone had tried to take it from him, and they had failed. And the reason they had failed was not luck or leverage or the particular sequence of legal arguments, though all of those had been necessary. The reason was simpler than that. He had been willing to wait longer than they had counted on. He had been willing to be patient past the point where impatience would have ended it. That was not a skill he had learned in 4 months in a shelter. That was the whole of his character, assembled over a lifetime, waiting for the test. He put on his jacket. He rode the elevator down. He walked out through the lobby into the April evening and turned toward the parking structure, and the city made its ordinary sounds around him. And he was exactly where he was supposed to be. I hope that one stayed with you. Go ahead and like the video and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've already got 2 picked out that I think you're going to love.